Over the last few years, some contenders have popped up to challenge Goodreads' position as the default reading tracker app, and I had never explored those before, so what I thought I'd do is I would try out a few reading tracker apps and find a verdict of what actually is the best for me and why. When I first started, I actually started with 5 apps, but I quickly eliminated 2 of them because they just didn't work for me. I'm not gonna go into any details just for the sake of time on those, but those were Book Sloth and Basmo. So the 3 that I ended up testing were Goodreads, of course, Storygraph, and Readerly. I'd heard a lot of people talk about Storygraph, a lot of my friends use Storygraph. Never heard anyone talk about Readerly, but when I started going in there, playing around with it, those were the ones that sort of made the most sense to me in terms of testing. And actually, I set out to do it for a month. I ended up doing it for over 2 months. We all know Goodreads for the most part, but just in case you don't, I'll explain that it is an app/website owned by Amazon, which is one of the reasons I was potentially looking at alternatives, where you can track what you're reading, what you have read, create different bookshelves, leave star ratings, leave reviews, and it tends to be the most popular and well-cited app or site for these sorts of things. It's something that publishers care a lot about in a way that they don't necessarily about other similar apps. They also do like the Goodreads Awards where readers get to vote on the best books of the year. And then they do also have discover and recommendation features. I myself hadn't used those before, but they do offer them in the app. It's worth noting that I'm only using the free version of any of these apps, but I still don't love the idea that I am supporting Amazon by doing that. And I know that they do make money from publishers and other sources based on the size of the user base. And I am contributing to that, and I'm gonna sit here and I'm gonna own that, just like I own the fact that I have an Audible membership as well. Storygraph is used by a lot of people as an alternative. I think people like that the stats about your reading are broken down a little bit more granularly. It looks at different breakdowns of like your genre reading, the length of books you're reading, stuff like that. And certainly the recommendations functionality is a lot more robust in Storygraph, or at least it's purported to be better. As well, a big difference between Storygraph and Goodreads is that in Storygraph, when you go to leave a review, first of all, you can use fractional star ratings, so you can use 0.25, 0.5, and 0.75 star ratings. But also there's a lot more metadata that you can fill out without having to write an actual review in terms of the pace of the book, the tones and emotions of the book, any content warnings, that kind of thing. So in theory, it makes it easier for you to capture the important information about the books that you're reading in order to help inform other readers' recommendations and your own recommendations without having to actually write a review. The third app that I use is Readerly, and this one works very different because instead of leaving reviews, you leave basically what are called gists, and rather than star ratings, you basically just say, not for me, I enjoyed it, it's a favorite, or neutral/unsure. So it's structured very differently, and it's meant to be really structured around the discussion side of it, which is present certainly in Goodreads, but is really the main feature of Readerly, supposedly. It does also, like Storygraph, give you a really interesting detailed breakdown of the reading that you're doing. Let's talk about how I was using Goodreads before. I get most of my book recommendations from YouTube, from Instagram, from just friends. I have never used Goodreads for book recommendations. For me, it's primarily a way of like keeping track of the books that I've read, especially for doing like these reading challenges. So you can set a goal for how many books you want to read during the year, and it will track your progress, tell you how far ahead or behind you are. And as you get towards the end of the year, if you're not hitting your goal yet, it'll tell you how many books you need to read per week or per month in order to hit your goal. I would of course use it for the star ratings, and I also connected with a lot of my friends on Goodreads so that I could see what they were reading and what ratings they were giving to the things that they were reading, because that makes it easier for me to discover things. What I didn't do was create a lot of like additional shelves. I know it's really popular in Goodreads for people to do that, but I have not done that. I have no additional shelves. I will occasionally mark books as want to read on Goodreads and use that as like a wish list, but mostly I tend to do that in other apps. I also have never really been one to update my progress in Goodreads. I will pretty much only update it once I've finished it. I don't give incremental updates. And honestly, nothing felt lacking about that to me. I was quite happy with my Goodreads experience, other than the fact that it's owned by Amazon and that it's supporting Amazon to use it. So I was looking at alternatives to give me the same sort of experience, or to give me features that were interesting and easy enough to use that I wanted to do so, and they were like adding to my experience rather than me feeling like there was anything lacking from my experience. So Storygraph is the most popular alternative, as I said, and I definitely think of all of the ones that I chose as the easiest to use. It is really easy to mark things as finished. It doesn't immediately try to make you leave a review, and it is connected to a database of books. So there was never a book that I was reading that I couldn't find on Storygraph that I had to create. I think the stats are okay, but I think that the value that you see in the stats and in the reports that it gives you really rely on the value that you place in the data that's being input in order to generate those, which is kind of the metadata that it asks you for when you're leaving a review. So for example, one of the things is like moods, and the options are like reflective, mysterious, tense, hopeful, inspiring, dark, challenging, emotional, adventurous, lighthearted, funny, informative, sad. There's all these moods that you could choose from, and I think that those can be so subjective, like challenging. Who's calling this challenging? It's gonna be so different for each person. Same with like inspiring. What inspires one person is not going to inspire another person. What one person describes as sad might be emotional for another person. And so I feel like it's maybe a little bit too subjective for that to be super insightful, and it relies on you really taking the initiative to fill that out for every book that you read, which can feel really overkill sometimes. You can connect with friends. I only did it for one friend, which was my friend Katie, so that I could see the books that she'd read while I was building our monthly blind date with the book swap. If you haven't seen that video, I'll put a link in the description. And honestly, that's pretty much it with Storygraph. It does give you recommendations, but I'm gonna be honest, I didn't find those recommendations very accurate. It's like shirtless men. Like, that's not the kind of romance novels that I tend to read. There's nothing like that in my recently read that makes that recommendation make sense to me. That said, I think the pros of Storygraph are it is not owned by Amazon, and I do think the stats are somewhat interesting, maybe as like an end of year wrap up. You can also set up reading challenges for the year, and you can do it in terms of number of books, number of pages, number of hours. So then we take a look at Readerly, which is definitely very different. Like I said, in theory, this one is all about the community, but I found that it must have a really small user base because I see the same people sharing things over and over again. And like if you go into the discussion section, you can scroll and just see there's less than one post per day on average in the entire Readerly discussion section. Like, it's just not that utilized for the thing that it's supposedly best at. Also, whatever database it's connected to, I found that it's less complete than the database that Storygraph and Goodreads are connected to, because I've had to add a lot of the books that I read, and not like books that no one's heard of or like indie books, like a Brene Brown book. And it won't let you add the book without adding a picture of the cover, which means you either have to go find an image of the cover and save it to your phone, or you have to like literally take a picture of the book. It just is a little bit annoying. I also found the app to be quite glitchy. Like, I couldn't update more than one book at a time. I would have to like close the app and then reopen it in order to update the next one. Otherwise I would just get frozen on the screen. It was very weird. I also found updating the books to be really difficult. By default, it wants you to do a percentage rather than pages, which I totally get if like your main user base is using e-readers and audiobooks more than like physical books. But seriously, like, I don't want to do the math on that in order to put into percentages. You can switch to pages, but you have to put in one of those things in order to update it, even to finish it. I basically just, when I was done with something, I had to put in 100%, save it, and then click finish now once it says estimated finish date today. Like, it just doesn't make sense. So then it's asking you to basically rate the book, and instead of star ratings, like I said, it's using not for me, I'd recommend it, a favorite, didn't finish, or neutral/unsure. I find that these are quite limiting. I found neutral/unsure to be the category that I was like using most for those. I've never been neutral about anything in my entire life. I always have an opinion, and forcing me to click neutral/unsure for anything between wasn't for me and I'd recommend it feels very constricting. So didn't really love that. Then it wants you to either create a gist, which is basically a summary, and it's like, why wouldn't I just look at the official summary? Or share a take. And in theory, it's showing the gists to people who haven't read the book and the takes to other people who have read the book. So the take, I guess, is the review, but why are we writing gists? Like, why can't we just pull in from whatever database you're using an official summary? That feels like the best thing to do, because the way that people describe books is going to be so subjective. I think that's the point of Readerly, is that subjectivity and like bringing it into the conversation and bringing it into the experience of finding and recommending books. But for me, that just didn't really jive well with what I wanted. You don't have to do those things, they're not required, but it is kind of the whole point of the app. You can create shelves as well as tags on Readerly, but again, because it's not functionality I was using in Goodreads, I didn't do it in Readerly either. And of course you can follow other people, but like I said, the user base seems to be really small. So I've got a really annoying conclusion, which is that nothing quite lived up to Goodreads for me. I think the recommendations are better, the experience is better, there's more people that are using it, which means the discussions and the pools of people that you can follow are better. There was nothing really compelling about Readerly to make me go in that direction. I do like the incremental star ratings in Storygraph, but it's just not quite enough to pull me over in that direction. As more people start to look at alternatives to Goodreads, it may be that I reconsider Storygraph as an option. It was a strong contender, but unfortunately for now, I'm gonna be sticking with Goodreads. I wouldn't call it a failed experiment though, because I did really try. I started in mid-December and I didn't stop until the end of February. So I feel like I can give a really good account of the experience of all of these. And for me, I just think Goodreads is the thing that I'm gonna keep on using until there's something to compel me in a different direction. What would be really great is if we had some new contenders enter the ring, and then I could run this experiment all over again. So if you have used a platform other than the 5 I mentioned, Goodreads, Storygraph, Readerly, Book Sloth, Basmo, then please let me know in the comments, because I would love to give it a try. If you're not already, be sure to hit subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.